If you've ever spent any time watching the History Channel, you've probably heard the phrase ancient astronaut theorists believe countless times, and each time it was followed by some ludicrous statement or claim that you hopefully felt didn't make any real and logical sense. Many of these claims are based on a misinterpretation of artwork or artifacts as being anachronistic, so-called out-of-place artifacts. Some examples of these include the Baghdad battery, a ceramic vase containing a copper tube that some believe was an ancient galvanic battery. While this very technically could theoretically work, it is much more likely that the tube had previously just contained scrolls that were in the vase for safekeeping but had since decomposed. Similarly, there is the helicopter hieroglyph, an ancient Egyptian carving from the Temple of Seti I that kind of looks a bit like a helicopter, even though we now know that this image came into being because the original hieroglyphs were plastered over and recarved to change the name of the current king. There are some that claim it is the result of an Egyptian encounter with extraterrestrials. But what if ancient astronaut theorists are actually correct? Not about the helicopter thing, of course, that'd be ridiculous. There's no conceivable reason that a species who managed to conquer interstellar flight would load up their spaceships with 1960s style helicopters to navigate around our planet. That would just be plain silly. That said, could the general idea that extraterrestrials have visited Earth during ancient history or prehistoric times actually be true? And where did the ancient alien theory even come from? So the idea that there is other life in the universe dates back to ancient times, at least in a manner of speaking. Ancient philosophers understood how unlikely it would be in a vast universe to only have a single planet harboring life, comparing it to if a single ear of wheat grew on a vast plain. However, the only way other worlds were conceived in ancient times was more like a multiverse rather than life on distant planets. That notion didn't become a popular idea until the medieval times, and it was extremely popular. Even the Roman Catholic Church was on board with the idea of life on other planets. Nicholas of Cusa wrote an extremely popular book on the topic before going on to become a cardinal and a papal legate, essentially the Vatican's version of an ambassador. Now, of course, you've probably already noticed a problem. Ancient astronaut theorists often bring up incredible advancements in maths and science from ancient Greece and Rome as proof that extraterrestrials visited Earth to give humanity a bit of a helping hand. If that was the case, why would the Greeks and Romans have been contemplating the possibility of other life in the universe? They shouldn't have been speculating about it in philosophy texts, they should have been recording it in the history books. But look, we're getting ahead of ourselves. The idea of life on other planets rose to popularity during the medieval times, as we said, and aliens began appearing in science fiction stories. Sometimes they came to Earth, and sometimes we found them on Mars or the Moon, but it was always depicted as a new encounter for both species. It wasn't until the very end of the 19th century that the idea of ancient aliens first appeared in books like Edison's Conquest of Mars. This new idea continued in science fiction until the 20th century, carried on by authors like H.P. Lovecraft. But for decades, it was entirely meant as fiction, because of course it was. The first person credited with proposing ancient aliens as an actual theory instead of a plot device was the British writer Harold Wilkins. Wilkins had studied English and history at the University of Cambridge before beginning what is charitably referred to as a career in journalism. Most of this supposed journalism was based around rumours of pirate gold and mysteries like the Mary Celeste. He was also a big believer in things like the Hollow Earth theory, claiming that tunnels into the Earth located in Brazil were home to the descendants of Atlantis. Journalism. Wilkins was also a proponent of the white gods theory. This theory proposes that South America was occupied by an advanced white race during ancient times. These people visited all of the other ancient civilizations who allegedly referred to them as white gods, and then they vanished off the face of the planet. While he saw this as a separate thing from the ancient aliens, there are many people who have combined them into a single theory. Anyway, in 1954, Wilkins became the first person to publish Ancient Aliens as a proposed theory rather than a work of fiction, even though all of his other work is considered pseudo-history and nearly all of his verifiable claims were provably false. This idea started to take off. It was both the Cold War and the space race, so everybody's eyes were on either alleged UFOs or mankind's first journeys into space. And if we could now leave our planet, well, why couldn't the aliens leave theirs? Then in 1963, the worst possible thing happened. Carl Sagan, an honest-to-God scientist, wrote a paper about the Drake equation in which he actually gave the theory genuine consideration. Believing that there should be 1 million intelligent civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy alone, some of them only a few hundred light years away, Sagan said that it was theoretically possible that aliens could have previously visited Earth. There were certain stories from ancient myths that could have described encounters with ancient aliens, and he figured it was worth a second look. To be clear though, Sagan said that everything he wrote was entirely speculation. It was all unproven, and it was extremely improbable. 3 years later, he co-authored a book with Soviet astrophysicist R.C. Shklovsky, in which they expanded on the idea presented in Sagan's paper. Again, they emphasized that their work was just speculation and should not be viewed as valid evidence of extraterrestrial contact. From the moment Sagan declared that maybe this is possible, but also probably not, it was off to the bloody races. Within years, authors were publishing books in which they took speculation posed out of scientific curiosity as valid evidence of extraterrestrial contact, because even in the 1960s, people only read the headlines instead of the actual article. While the authors and History Channel personalities who have made a career out of pushing this idea are too numerous to discuss, they all rely on the same arguments. So, what exactly are those arguments? What evidence do ancient astronaut theorists rely on to prove their case? First, there is a common theme in ancient artwork of depicting deities who possess a mix of human and animal traits. Some argue that these anthropomorphized animals are actually alien races, which is more than a little bit of a stretch. This would be like someone from the future assuming that our modern civilization had made contact with alien life because they found an old newspaper with comic strips featuring Garfield, Snoopy, and Calvin and Hobbes. Second, there are the ancient megalithic structures like the pyramids of Giza and seemingly impossible works of art like the Nazca Lines. Proponents of ancient aliens suggest that these things would have been impossible for such primitive people to have created with the technology available to them. There are many that look at the Nazca Lines and immediately see that they must have been some sort of landing strip for alien spacecraft. After all, what could possibly be a more practical shape for a landing strip than a crudely drawn monkey or spider? While we don't necessarily know why someone chose to create them, other than to say that they could, there's nothing to suggest that these weren't created by humans. It wouldn't be that difficult to draw the intended design and then plot out the points in the landscape to scale that design up massively. It would certainly take a while, and it would be a massive pain in the arse, but it doesn't require advanced technology. And why would aliens even want to draw these lines? Perhaps if they could be seen from space, one could argue that the lines were meant to be some sort of post-it note on our planet to remind them of what sort of flora and fauna existed here. That's not a sensible explanation, but barring that there isn't really any explanation for why extraterrestrials would construct these lines, it sort of has to do. And then there are the pyramids. One author put forth the popular theory that Egypt essentially sprung out of nowhere as a ready-made civilization complete with the Pyramid of Giza that had been constructed for them by aliens. But again, this doesn't make any sense given all the other archaeological evidence. There is clear evidence of the progression of ancient Egypt. We can even see the burial sites evolve from small mounds of clay to larger pyramids, and there is a lot of historical evidence detailing the construction of the Great Pyramid. Modern experiments have even demonstrated that it is possible to move a 40-ton stone with about 100 people using only the technology that would have been available at the time. Admittedly, that giant stone was only moved a few inches, but they were also just researchers trying to prove a point. Ancient Egypt had a population of over 1 million, and the pyramids were built to honor their pharaohs, who were viewed as literal gods. They would have been a lot more motivated and had a lot more than 100 workers at their disposal to get the job done. So, maybe aliens weren't responsible for these megalithic structures, but could they have left behind something small? Now, we've already touched on the idea of out-of-place artifacts, and there are countless examples used by ancient astronaut theorists. Many of them are either hoaxes or deliberate misinterpretations of archaeological artifacts. But let's look at two of the most popular artifacts used to prove aliens helped shape earlier society. First, there's the Saqqara bird, a wooden bird from ancient Egypt. The stylized version of the bird makes it look a lot like an airplane, and some have argued that it's evidence the Egyptians understood the principles of aviation. There are even claims that the Egyptians invented the first airplane in the 3rd century BC thanks to scientific knowledge passed to them by aliens. Of course, there is a simple reason that a wooden toy bird might look a lot like an aeroplane, which is that airplanes look like Birds. That's entirely by design, as birds were indeed studied extensively in the creation of airplanes. But the original artifact was far too heavy to ever fly, so models of the Sakara bird were made using balsa wood, a material commonly used in toy and model airplanes. They even added a vertical stabilizer to the tail to give it greater odds of success. The result was a mediocre at best toy glider, hardly proof that the Egyptians had mastered aviation. The other, and allegedly more compelling piece of evidence that we'd like to examine is the Antikythera mechanism. This was an ancient Greek computer built in the 2nd century BC. Looking just at the headline, the idea of a computer from 150 BC certainly seems like evidence of alien intervention, but there is more going on here. The Antikythera mechanism isn't a computer in the modern sense. It's what is referred to as an analog computer, a hand-cranked system of gears that performed a specific action, in this case, a form of computation. More specifically, the mechanism was an orrery, a mechanical model of the solar system used to calculate the future position of celestial bodies and to predict eclipses decades in advance. While the Antikythera mechanism is one of the oldest known of these devices, the ancient Roman philosopher Cicero made reference to them having been constructed by Greek polymath Thales and Miletus in the 6th century BC. One could argue that just changes the timeline of alien intervention, but there is a much bigger problem. The device discovered in the Antikythera shipwreck is based on a geocentric model of the solar system. Why would an alien civilization travel hundreds of light years to Earth, give humans advanced technology, but still let them believe that the sun revolved around the Earth? Given that we already know ancient astronomers were capable of performing the necessary calculations on their own, it makes more sense that they invented these devices on their own as a means to shortcut the process. Now, thus far, there is absolutely no evidence that extraterrestrials visited Earth and interacted with humans in either ancient or prehistoric times. We've spent decades intently searching, and we haven't even discovered evidence that aliens exist. They almost certainly should exist somewhere, we just can't find them. But if there was a spacefaring civilization that came to Earth a few thousand years ago, we would expect to find more compelling evidence. All of the supposed evidence here on Earth is much more easily explained in other ways, and those explanations tend to be supported with additional archaeological evidence and historical documentation. We also haven't found any evidence in outer space that would suggest the ancient astronaut theory, and if it was actually true, we'd kind of probably expect to find something. Though our expectations are based on our own experiences and understanding of technology, if an advanced species was both close enough to Earth and capable of traveling here, we should see some evidence of their existence, be it a planet covered in city lights, a Dyson sphere surrounding a star, or even radio signals that they'd broadcast centuries ago. We should have found something. Of course, this complete and total lack of even the tiniest shred of evidence supporting ancient alien theories doesn't actually mean that it's impossible. Like Carl Sagan said, it is unproven and improbable, but it is still technically possible. Given the current lack of evidence, if aliens really have visited humans, it almost certainly would have happened in prehistoric times before we could properly record what happened. Then again, this entire concept was born out of fiction stories anyway, so maybe ancient astronaut theorists are overthinking something that was just meant to be an entertaining story. I mean, maybe. After all, there isn't an entire industry based on trying to prove Hogwarts is a real school. At least we really hope there isn't.